I want to turn to Israel. It's a multi-front domestic and external nightmare for everyone, basically, but especially for Benjamin Netanyahu, who was trying to run this war. We're going to speak to a defence expert who's just been in Tel Aviv today, seeing both the defence minister and the prime minister in just a few minutes. It has been an awful week for the Jewish state. Hopes of peace seem to be fading fast, even though President Biden says there is hope. He says a deal with Hamas is 90% agreed. But earlier on LBC, James O'Brien spoke to the former Prime Minister Tony Blair, and James asked him whether peace in the Middle East is further away now than when he was in power. Have a listen.
I think you'd have to say yes to that. At the moment, but it could easily be revived. I mean, I always say the difference between the Northern Ireland peace process and the Israeli-Palestinian one is that in Northern Ireland we were able to achieve peace, but without an agreement as to what the final outcome. You know, there's still a difference of opinion. You know, the Unionists want Northern Ireland. In the UK, the Nationalists want it united with the south of Ireland. Whereas in the case of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the irony is there is an agreement amongst most reasonable people that you need to have a two-state solution.
Well, that was Tony Blair speaking earlier today on LBC. Yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was interviewed by Fox News, and he put the blame for the non-existence of a deal squarely at the door of Hamas.
They don't want any deal. They just want Israel out. They don't care for any of these conditions. Israel has to leave. They have to take over the Gaza Strip. And you know that they vowed to do October 7th massacre again and again and again, right, where they butchered our people, raped our women, murdered them, beheaded our men, burnt babies alive, and took hostages. We're not going to let that happen again. So Hamas is not there with a deal. There's not a deal in the making, unfortunately.
And it's
that still hasn't happened. They want to reconstitute their terror kingdom, and unfortunately it's not close, but we'll do everything we can to get them to the point where they do make a deal, and at the same time we prevent Iran from resupplying Gaza as this great terror enclave right next to Tel Aviv, right next to our major cities.
I think the question, after I've heard from both those leaders, one former, one current, is a peace deal in the Middle East further away than ever? I mean, people don't want to extinguish hope entirely, clearly, especially not Tony Blair. And Benjamin Netanyahu, frankly, needs to get a deal. Otherwise, I mean, everyone says he's continuing in office and because he wants to continue the war. So there's some relationship between his persecution of the war and his political ends. But the thing is that it's becoming too unbearable for everyone. And I think last week it reached a pitch with those funerals that we saw of the murdered hostages. And having met some of the hostage families and having interviewed the mother of Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, it just does feel very personal and painful. Obviously, as far as I'm concerned, it's a war in a faraway country, but it is a place of which I know something. I completely accept there have been atrocities on both sides, and in particular today in the West Bank, a 26-year-old American woman with joint Turkish-US citizenship allegedly got shot in the West Bank near Nablus. And there have, of course, been tens of thousands of deaths in Gaza. But Israel has to destroy Hamas. And I can't disagree with what Benjamin Netanyahu said to Fox, which is that Hamas just doesn't agree to anything. They are a murderous, theocratic, genocidal terrorist organisation bankrolled by Iran, and they won't. I don't think they ever will. They are not straight dealers. We have to help defend Israel and help it to defend it itself. And just a note on the lawfare. Of course, what happened during the week to extend the crisis to another front was the lawfare. And David Lammy announced the pause of about 10% of arms licenses to Israel. Now, he presented that as a legal decision based on law. International law is a matter of personal interpretation. That's why there is debates rage for years about what is a genocide, and there are conventions to debate all these things and articles about whether something is a crime against humanity or a genocide. This was a political decision by Lord Hermer, who is a Keir Starmer appointee, and I presume he would have resigned had not David Lammy announced that pause in the arms licenses to Israel. I don't agree with the arms ban to Israel. I think that I have to agree with what Benjamin Netanyahu said about it. It's abandoning a fellow democracy, and it will only embolden Hamas. But you may disagree with all of that, and you may think that the only way to lead to peace in the Middle East is to suspend arms sales to Israel from the UK, which only actually represents about 0.02% of the total. So question to you tonight, just before we get to Andrew Fox, who's just been in Israel and is much better equipped than I am to tell us where things are and how close we are or far away from a peace deal. The question is peace in the Middle East further away than ever? And Andrew Fox, the research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, Middle East strategy expert, former paratrooper, who's just, I think, landed back from meeting in Israel with the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, earlier this week. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time. You must be tired. Hi there.
Yeah, how are you doing? Yeah, I mean, I had a restorative nap at about 4 o'clock to make sure I was in fit shape to talk to you. So we're doing okay.
Well, I mean, can you bring us up to date? Because I haven't been in the room with the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant. I haven't been in the room with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. From Israel's side, where are they? Where is the war at?
Well, which war are we talking about? Of course, there's about 7 different fronts in this conflict, and it's an exceptionally tricky question. I think we'll start with Gaza. I think that makes the most sense as it gets the most headlines. There is a clear split in the cabinet on the Israeli side. Mr. Gallant was very clear that he wanted a ceasefire deal to withdraw from Gaza, to then deal with the Hezbollah threat in the north and the West Bank, and then reinvest into Gaza in due course.
What does reinvest into Gaza mean? Sorry to interrupt. I read that in your Substack and I didn't understand it there, so please explain.
So go back in.
Okay.
Go back in due course. And the flaw for me in that is that, of course, when Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, they said 1 rocket and we can go back in. And there were plenty of rockets and they weren't really able to due to international pressure. And international pressure is a key component of Hamas's strategy. So if Israel withdraw, I suspect it'll be very difficult for them to go back in again afterwards. And it makes no sense to me personally to change your strategic goal in the middle of a war. Mr. Netanyahu was very clear that the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border between Egypt and Gaza, that is currently held by the IDF. They found 200 tunnels running from Gaza into Egypt, some of them 50 meters deep, some of them going 2 kilometers into Egypt before surfacing. It's the main artery for Hamas's resupply, for smuggling, for getting cash in, for getting people in and out. And whilst Israel hasn't found and destroyed every tunnel, it makes no sense to me personally to withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor. So there's a real tension at the top of the Israeli government. And then if we look at the sort of domestic pressure that things like the execution, the murder of the hostages in Gaza is causing, again, that's Hamas's strategy. They've been leveraging it. They've been drip feeding the final videos of the hostages all week to cause maximum impact and put maximum internal pressure on the Israeli government. I don't think it's as severe as some reports are making out. Yes, there are protests in Tel Aviv, but most of the people I spoke to, and of course this is anecdotal, but most of the people I spoke to understand the need for Israel's long-term security and the need to make sure Hamas's capability to fight is destroyed. So it's a really, really complex and difficult time in Israel at the moment.
And yeah, you say there's a bit of disunity in the cabinet, with the defence minister more keen to do some sort of deal to release the hostages than Benjamin Netanyahu, whose war aims are the elimination of Hamas is the overriding priority, which means he has to retain the Philadelphia corridor, which means that Hamas isn't going to do a deal. I mean, so have we reached a kind of impasse on that basis?
I don't think Hamas are going to do a deal anyway.
Okay.
Their strategy here is the long game. They want to destroy Israel. That's their plan, and it's a component part of an Iranian plan to apply pressure on Israel from 7 different directions. You have Hezbollah in Lebanon, you have militias in Iraq, you have the Houthis in Yemen, you have pressure in the West Bank and the endless disagreements and conflicts that are going on there. You've got Iran itself. And then you have Syria. So it's a seven-front war. And the longer Hamas are able to draw this war in Gaza out, the more international condemnation they can get for against Israel, the more they can make Israeli society tired and sick of war, the more they can hurt Israeli society by torturing and murdering the hostages, of which at least the estimates are that more than half of the 101 remaining are still alive. So, Hamas have plenty of opportunity to keep leveraging these hostages over a very long period of time. And, they want this long game to continue. So I'd be very surprised if they agree.
Right, put all those points taken. Can I just ask whether you think that the international condemnation and the lawfare that's gone on, risen to a bit of a head this week with David Lammy and the ICC, is that Israel's eighth front to this war, which is trying to deal with very developing hostile international opinion and also legal judgments?
Yeah, and that's a really good way of putting it. And I think I'm going to steal that. I'll
Do
give
have
you
it.
But yeah, the eighth front. No, I like that a lot. And you're absolutely right. It's like, so some criticism is justified. Of course it is. The destruction in Gaza is immense. It's there's a really good reason for that. It's because the tunnels are under every inch of Gaza, and to destroy the tunnels, the stuff on top is going to get destroyed too. So if you're going to take away Hamas's capability, the only way to do it is by causing that mass damage. And I think it's absolutely legitimate to say that's too much. I don't agree, but I think it's a fair criticism. And yes, all armies at war will at times have soldiers who go well beyond what is legally permissible, and that can and is. Most importantly, it is being investigated by the Israeli army's legal branch. So there's plenty of legitimate criticism, I think. But the key point is that, this is still an existential threat. And the fact there's this lawfare components, I don't think it'll go anywhere. You can't convict on no evidence. And if they do, then they've destroyed the entire legitimacy of international law.
And since your last visit, which you came back just now from Israel, you've been regularly to that part of the world. In terms of the question that was put to Tony Blair this morning by James O'Brien, which is peace in the Middle East further away than ever, how would you answer that?
I'd quite unusually find myself in agreement with Mr. Blair. The simple fact is that the two-state solution is dead whilst Hamas remain a player. It's just not going to happen. And you can see why. You couldn't possibly expect Israel to come to a peaceful settlement with the people who did October the 7th. I mean, the evidence that's been released to the public is a fraction of the stuff that I've seen. And it's genuinely the most horrifying thing I've seen in my life. And I've done 3 tours of Afghanistan in combat roles. And that doesn't come close to what I've seen of the footage of 7th of October and the aftermath. When you walk the ground in places like Kibbutz Be'eri, Kibbutz Re'im, Nahal Oz, the military base where they burned 22 soldiers alive inside the base. You cannot expect Israel to come to peaceful settlement with the people that did that. So, the biggest block to a two-state solution right now is Hamas, and it's dead until they're gone. Simple as that.
Thank you so much for your time, Andrew Fox,